We're so glad to be with you all today. We love you. We're thankful for you. And we're thankful that we're here in the presence of God today and that we get to hear from Makoto Fujimura. So let me start with just a couple of things that have been said about Mako. His life has been a journey. His father studied linguistics under Noam Chomsky.
Yeah, he actually was doing research with
him, directly with him.
Noam Chomsky when
Yeah.
I was born
Wow.
in Boston in 1960, and he was one of the leading pioneers in acoustics research. So if you call up Siri, you get a machine voice. He in the early 70s was doing pure research that led to speech reproduction, and he said, I have a problem with the current mode of research, which will never lead to a machine speaking close to a human voice. And he was a little bit ostracized by his colleagues because he was challenging their theories and theories that they depended on for their livelihood. But he was right. To this day, machines still sound choppy and sound like machines. Wow. So that was my father.
That's a great history. That's a great history. And so a quote about Mako's work too. Let's start with that. Robert Kushner said, "The idea of forging a new kind of art about hope, healing, redemption, refuge, while maintaining visual sophistication and intellectual integrity is a growing movement, one which finds Makoto Fujimura's work at the vanguard." So if you don't mind, we've got a lot of budding artists here, as well as scientists, leaders, people who are ready to engage society. How did you first fall in love with art?
Well, I was always an artist, and I thought everybody was.
Yeah.
And I went to middle school, found out that I was unusual and to think that way. And it took me a while to come to a point where I said that whoever it is that told us, any of us, that we're not artists of some kind, that we're not makers, we don't create into the world something that is invited by this creator God to join this creator in making, that person is wrong. It often I think all of us up to third grade are artists, and then somebody tells us we're not, and we spend the rest of maybe adult years wondering if what is so mechanistic about our lives that seems to we have lost this sense of humanity in society, and I think that's part of it. Is that no, we are all artists of some kind, artists of the kingdom, certainly, and we have been invited to this feast of creativity, imagination, and joy that comes from making, and it's part of our education to we find that through. So all that to say, I was always an artist. I was very fortunate that my parents, my mother especially, an educator, saw very early on my gift, and she nurtured that. As it turns out, I didn't know that's what she was doing, but she made it possible for me to have the life that I have today.
Beautiful. What are your mother's and father's names?
So my mother's name was Yoko. My father's name was Osamu. They passed away last 3 years. So when you lose somebody that you love, you actually gain a perspective on that person that you never had before. And this is not due to the fact that I felt like I knew my parents well, but after they passed, I realized that there is something is given to you as a gift when they go on to the next stage, and there's something about that you gain as a result, and so the legacy, such as my work, right now being shown at Gonzaga, is a reflection of their view, sacrifices to allow me to be who I am. And so that is something that I'm keenly aware of. And today I got to see my own works in Gonzaga Museum, and it was such a beautiful experience of seeing your own work, but presented in such a highly professional manner. And I was telling the curator how much it means to me, because those works were done right after my father's passing, and everything is about sound, it seems, and it has something to do with art being mirrored in his own scientific research and his life, and really teaching me about what human beings can do that machines cannot do. And art should capture something that machines cannot capture. So I tell people all the time if you go to my exhibit, take out your iPhones or whatever the device you have and try to take a digital photo of my work, which is very hard to do, especially the Mysterion work. It flattens because the colors disappear. It becomes grayish rather than the vibrant green and blue that it is, and that's why the refractive surface that the digital camera cannot capture. Right. In fact, it's designed to remove that, so it can identify the object clearly.
That's beautiful. I love that. So some of you have been studying long history and reading people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Who's reading Dietrich Bonhoeffer right now? Okay. The rest of you will be reading Dietrich Bonhoeffer when you get to up to the senior year. And there was a theologian that was someone whose work Bonhoeffer loved. His name was Rudolf Otto, and he referred to the concept of the holy, or the concept of God, as Mysterium tremendum et fascinans, this fear-invoking and powerful essence that moves us, that also attracts us and draws us into intimacy. So the gospel is also referred to as mystery. How does the mystery of the gospel inform what you are trying to be as an artist and as a person?
Yeah, that's a good question. The monumental piece, Silence Mysterion, at the museum, you go in the back and you experience that. It's titled Mysterion because of what Paul describes in Ephesians as the gospel. He's investing his life to the mystery of the gospel, not just to the gospels, and which is an interesting thing to pause and think about. Why would Paul say that? We talk about the good news as Christians, and we want the world to know. We evangelize, we disciple, we create disciples, make disciples for all nations. But why is Paul talking about the mystery of the gospel and not the information of the gospel? What is the difference? And that actually has something to do with what I just talked about, my father's research, the gap between the information, the segmented information of, let's say, human speech and the actual speech. He spoke of the prosaic nature of human speech, which is the way that we communicate is more than the words themselves. There's a lot more nuanced reality. So it's not just information, but there's mystery of the human speech. And when Noam Chomsky was doing generative grammar, he assumed that this mystery was universal, that it is in every culture, every language. And in some ways he's right. It's difficult to be certain of the universality of human speech, but the assumption, I think, is there to connect us with whatever your tongue and tribe. We have some common base that we can relate to, and no matter how well the data is taken, that is a hard place to find. At the end of the day, it's amazing how hard communication is. Really is. We think we can communicate by texting somebody, or and in some ways we are communicating, but in other ways, for instance, the layers and layers of feelings that you might have about what you're going through in life. You may be going through some difficult things, or you may be going through some joyous, happy things. But both of these experiences somehow don't come across in emojis and truncated ways that we communicate. You have to have a community. You have to have a family. You have to have friends to share that with, without words, without sometimes with tears, sometimes with presence, sometimes by dancing, sometimes by and those cannot be captured, in the ways that we think we can easily communicate. So there's a mystery to that too. There's a mystery here among you, what you remember. You work very hard during the year to accomplish tasks and pass your exams and do your projects. But a lot of times, as we look back, we don't remember those things.
Yeah.
What we remember are things that are intangible, things that you felt deeply, disappointments that you've had, or successes that you've had that became more than what you deserve. Those things you remember. And so I think that's part of education, to perhaps amplify or accentuate that part that cannot be categorized and certainly in an informational way to package and market, which is what social media is trying to do constantly. And so you have something that we really need as human beings, and that's part of what I think the mystery of the gospel is pointing to.
So we asked you, how did you fall in love with art? And I know you have a unique story as far as how you fell in love with God. So can you tell us about how you fell in love with God?
So I was 27. I was back in Japan for graduate school in fine arts, and I was put into this I was very fortunate to be placed in Tokyo University of Fine Arts, the best art school in Japan, to study Nihonga, the traditional Japanese style painting, which is basically this way of painting since 13th century, 12th century Japan, and using minerals, pulverized minerals, and gold and silver. And I call it slow art because it takes time to prepare the materials. You're basically making your own paint and then applying them in layers. And I had gone to a wonderful liberal arts school called Bucknell University in Pennsylvania, had studied many things, including literature and the arts, as well as sciences, and graduated with a double major and minor in creative writing. But I was rereading through works of William Blake, English mystic and a romantic poet, and I was intrigued by his work during my undergraduate years, where I felt I was searching for something, I did not grow up in a Christian home. So this was kind of new to me to be exposed to through Western literature, the stories and tenets of the Gospels. And so I was sitting in my room, just waded through about 400 pages of an epic poem called Jerusalem, which was Blake's last epic poem. And Jesus is on the cross speaking to the main emanation character, Albion, Blake's invention that is really representing searching humanity, asking Jesus, Lord, what can I do? My selfhood cruel marches against thee, deceitful in its pride. And this idea that internal mechanism has gone haywire and we cannot really understand even what we want to understand or do the things that we know is right. But Jesus' answer to Albion is a beautiful summarization of the Gospel of John. And Jesus says, "Fear not, Albion, unless I rise, you cannot live." And he goes on to this beautiful soliloquy, which just arrested me. And Jesus on the cross says, "Wouldst thou love one who has never died for thee, or ever die for one who has not died for thee? And if God dieth not for man, and gives himself eternally for man, man cannot exist. For God is love, as man is love. And every kindness to another is but a little death in divine image." And when I read that, something happened to me. First of all of the questions that I had, Albion had already asked in the poem. So I was drawn in because Albion's emanation was really just my heart reflected in this poem. And then Jesus on the cross, his answer is not really an answer. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to this relationship with this Creator God, whose love is defined by sacrifice. And this sacrifice is what Jesus brought on this earth. So it's tangible, it's historic, it's physical. That Jesus shed his blood for me. Because I would not know love unless it is shown to me. And I would not know how to die for another person unless that's shown to me. And that definition of reframing of who Jesus was and what he came to do became very personal for me at that point. And I realized if this is true, and if I need that love, which I desperately do to this day, then everything must change. How I view myself, how I view the world, how I struggled with all these paradigms of, modernist and postmodern paradigms, and how it's unsatisfying to me when I was trying to search for beauty. And there's no place for beauty in contemporary art world. So I was kind of transgressing against, as an artist, trying to express something that is simply beautiful. And yet I was using beautiful materials, which is pulverized and fragmented. It is done in a way that almost like this refiner's fire, refining. And I couldn't justify that. So when I read this passage, this whole thing kind of flooded into my heart. And I felt like if this is true, then this is the path. There's no other path. That I could truly find myself. I could truly find beauty. that it resonated deep within as something that is truthful, that I had finally come face to face with, and so that's when I began to. I didn't know that I had become a Christian until a year later. I kept on arguing with my Christian friends why they are wrong, but they kept on quizzing me, and they had like list of things that you believe as a Christian. Do you believe in the resurrection? I said, of course you. I mean, you have to believe in the resurrection. If this is what Jesus said, he must have risen from the dead, because we would not hear this. This is too crazy to be true, unless it was true. And my friends were like, so you are a Christian? I said, no, I'm not a Christian. I have all sorts of problems with the church and Christianity, and so it took me a year.
I think it's such a unique journey for you. You get to Japan, and there's this history in Japan that's sort of hidden, that Mako ends up writing quite a bit about in his book Silence and Beauty, which is also a response to the film by Scorsese called Silence, that you were with Scorsese some in communication with him about that. And that comes from this novel, one of the great Japanese international world novelists, Shusaku Endo. And it basically looks at the martyrdom of the Japanese Christians over the Shogun era, in which there was really a strong movement of Christianity in Japan at that time, and then there was all this torture, and you have to deny Christ or you will be tortured and killed, and there was this physical object, symbolic, called a fumie, and people would have to step on the image of Christ or the image of Christ with his mother Mary, and to show that they denied Christ. And this came into play with your art at that time, right? And so can you
absolutely
speak to that?
Yeah, so most of us think of Japanese culture and the state of Christianity there to be very small, and in fact it is. It's less than 3% at best Christian population in Japan. But in Kyoto in 1560s, there were 300,000 Christians in Kyoto, which was the capital of Japan at the time. That's roughly 25% of the population, which arguably makes Kyoto the Christian capital of Japan. But soon after, the persecution began with the consolidation of feudal powers in Japan, and they specifically target Christians. They didn't target necessarily Buddhists, although there were persecution toward Buddhists and other religions, but Christian persecution was pernicious and targeted for 250 years, which means that the invention of fumie as a technique to identify Christians in a culture in which it is illegal to be a Christian. It was one of the steps that Japanese magistrate made sure that any kind of faith toward Christ was wiped out of Japan. Therefore, it went into hiding. And the hidden culture still to this day expresses that Christ, which was suppressed, as a negative imprint. And so I encountered fumie soon after I was baptized into Christian faith. And I understood for the first time, perhaps, why I needed to go back to Japan to become a Christian. Because that was part of my journey to peer into this horrific history of Japanese Christians, what they had to go through. But also that I was, in part, a descendant of that, whether I was on the side of the magistrates persecuting Christians or whether I was on the side of Christians who had to deny their faith to survive. Right? There was bifurcation that you really had no choice. Very few people could be martyrs. And so majority of us would fail miserably. And this is part of Endo's writing, is that he was talking about, of course, 17th century missionaries, Portuguese missionaries coming into Japan. But he was also talking about 20th century, post Nagasaki and Hiroshima, where Japanese psyche were in crisis. They had realized that all the nationalism that grew out of the consolidation and the isolationist realities of 250 years has grown into this huge, nationalistic fervor that led to the wars, and then because of the war, and partly because of the atomic weapons, they were in this psychologically debilitated, weakened state, and so they didn't have an identity other than the Western identity that was superimposed, and so Endo was identifying something that was very important for Japan. It's almost like if you grew up in your own country and your own sense of identity with your family, with your background, that was severed. Like you have to be somebody else. You have to pretend that you were some other tribe, or and you have to live your life that way. Your true identity has to be hidden, because that will bring shame. That will cause you to not, that was illegal. So that would cause this psychology, of lost identity. And actually, he was talking about modern condition as well.
Yes.
So all of us can identify in some ways with this.
Powerful. So when you get a chance to go to Gonzaga and witness the exhibition of these paintings, you'll see as you enter, Mako was commissioned to do an illuminated Gospels. If you recall some of the illuminated Gospels from ancient times, his take on an illuminated Gospel will be something unique to you. So there's these frontispieces, which are the heads, the paintings that are the heads of the chapters of the Gospels. And then there's also, I think is it 89?
89.
89,
Yes.
About the size of your hand, very minute, detailed paintings of letters that are the start of the chapters for the Gospels. So, but as you come in, you enter through a painting that's called The Tears of Christ, and you come through these illuminated Gospels, and then out into the space, going from paintings that are the size of your hand to one that sort of quietly builds a tremendous amount of gravity as you turn into the larger part of the gallery. And that painting ends up being 33 feet by 11 feet. So you have these sort of different experiences as you're going in. And so I'm interested, we're in a situation where we know that Christianity and maybe all major elements of human creation and a certain, religiosity coincides with a certain educational force or governmental force. And out of that, we get all kinds of trauma. Genocides and history of woundedness, and somehow Christ meets us there in our ways of tremendously wronging each other and wronging the world environmentally. So here we come into this moment where we enter through the tears of Christ and we go into something like fire and water in your exhibition. And what does it mean to you to enter through the tears of Christ?
So when I was asked to illumine the 4 Holy Gospels for the 400th anniversary of King James Bible, it was first of all a tremendous honor, and Lane Dennis, who called me, I didn't know him, but he has been following my work for, he said, over 20 years, and that he's always thought of me as a person to do this task. And he said, by the way, you should know that no single artist has been commissioned by a Bible publisher to do illuminations for the 4 Gospels in over 400 years. that there's a vacuum
Yeah.
since King James that has we have neglected this tradition and way that artists can participate in worship. And so I was like, no, that can't be true. So I
Start
did
looking
some
it up,
research, and she was right. There are bits and pieces, William Blake doing the Book of Job, or Chagall's paintings, but they're not necessarily to illumine the scriptures. They were about them. And so I began to, first of all, be terrified what I was about to take on, and I had about a year and a half to do it, which is not that long of a time. And so I, when I tell younger artists that, the bigger the project, the narrower your focus needs to be. You need to actually limit yourself, because you that pinhole that you can, project out of is the only way you can accomplish something ambitious. So I was so intimidated, I chose the shortest passage in the entire Bible, which is John 11:35. Jesus wept. Jesus wept. So if you're ever asked in Sunday schools to memorize passage, pick that one. I mean, 2 words. But I think it is a pinhole the entire Genesis creation and into new creation. It's the pinhole of gratuitous, extravagant love of God, which doesn't really make sense. Jesus is on the hills of Bethany, and he just came there to raise Lazarus from the grave. He tells his disciples this, I'm delaying my coming intentionally. And this upsets his friends, so the sisters of Lazarus, Mary and Martha. And they are upset with Jesus. Martha comes, the rational, I call her the CEO of the family, is in control of everything, and she's puzzled. Why didn't you come when we called you? Because if you had come, my brother would not have died. And this is the famous interaction where, for the first time in the Gospels, where someone recognizes the resurrection. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and life. And do you believe that? And Martha says, yes, rationally, I do believe that. But why are you late? So she brings her sister, who is an artist, very emotional. She's upset, angry at Jesus for coming late to the party. She says exact words, word for word, what Martha says. Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. And instead of giving a rational explanation, as he did to Martha, to Mary, he doesn't say a word. And he weeps. And I asked myself, why did he weep? Because all he had to do was to take Mary by the hand, go to the grave, resurrect Lazarus, and tell Mary, ye of little faith. Right? I have the power to resurrect. So why are you worried and concerned and weeping? He doesn't do that. He literally wastes time with Jesus on the hills of Bethany weeping, angry at death. And I think only those of us who've been through some darkness, losing your loved ones, you understand that. You understand that when we live in a fallen world, we need Jesus to weep with us, not to explain this or to even show the power of God, which God will restore all things. But for now, God chooses to stay present in that pain and that suffering. And if that's true, right, if that is the pinhole through which creation and the new creation will flow through, then beauty and mercy, 2 things that really doesn't make sense in the world. If you are trying to just simply survive, trying to get ahead, trying to beat the other person so you can get ahead, it doesn't help to waste time, creating something beautiful. It doesn't help to show mercy to somebody who is suffering. It's better to just go straight, right, to the grave. But that's not Jesus' way. And this 2 words, Jesus wept, becomes a pinhole through which we understand the entire project of God's creation. That God himself, though he did not need us, created out of gratuitous love, extravagant love, that allows us to float in the margins of our gray utilitarian pragmatic world and dare to speak in ways that projects or creates beauty into the world. And we don't realize how necessary this is. So you will always be fighting against those naysayers in 3rd grade that says you are not an artist. You should not be wasting your time making art. You should not be wasting your time caring for other people. But those things turn out to be the most important, essential task.
Thank you. So get your questions ready. We'll ask Mako 1 or 2 more, and then we'll hear from you. Van Gogh, one of your beloved artists,
Yes.
brothers,
Yes.
talked about Christ was the greatest artist because he painted not with paint and with brush, but with human souls.
Mm-hmm.
And he said also that the greatest work of art is to love someone.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that experience for you. The greatest work of art is to love someone.
Right, and Vincent is such a good example of the extravagant gift that kept on creating, providing beauty that no one wanted at the time, but now millions of people see the Starry Night, and his work continues to expand generatively into the world, speaking to us each of us differently. Such an amazing phenomenon, and his life so ignored by his contemporaries, except a few people who recognize his gifts, and the life that ended tragically is one of these hidden realities that once we kind of peer into, opens up a new understanding of who we are. And he is right. God, the artist, I think God is the only artist, true artist, who can create something out of nothing. And we are but imitators, small artists, all of us. But God then, in his gratuity and love, invites us to be co-creators in a sense, inviting us to be something that we do not even dare think about, which is to use our imagination and use our capacity to join God into the new creation. And so it matters what we do. The one kind word that you share with somebody who is suffering matters to God, and that is the brick from which the new creation is created. Every beautiful painting, every effort to make something that perhaps nobody understands at the time matters to God, because God is the artist who sees us, little artists, if we are trying to do anything built on the foundation of Christ, as Van Gogh did. That was the way he wanted to honor his creator through painting, by painting parables. Each of his paintings are parables. And so if we do that, then God certainly expands and amplifies that small gift into this fantastic generative reality that in Van Gogh's case we're seeing on this side of eternity, not just the next. So it's it's a reflection of God's purpose for each of us to endeavor to do small things that every day to provide mercy and create beauty. And those two things will never go away. That they are forever etched and amplified in the new creation to come.
Wonderful. Out to you. Questions from you. Feel free to step forth and ask something of Mako. Go ahead.
Yeah. Ah, okay. Thanks for asking that. I don't know, but my mother kept a painting when I was 3, and she framed it and gave it to me for my college graduation. And when my mother, because of her dementia, went into nursing home, I get back to her, and when she passed, I got it back and I reframed it. Astonishingly, I was born in Boston, went to Sweden for a year and a half before going to Japan. And so this painting must have been painted in Japan. But it has all the Swedish colors, and it has the gestures that I still use today. The color palettes are very similar to what I use today. And now, what's beautiful about that is that even though my mother and I didn't really talk about my future as an artist, she saw my gift very early on. And she had 2 uncles who were artists. One was an artist, visual artist, and the other was a playwright. And she would always tell me how hard it was for them. And yet she never told me that I can't be an artist. So there she was at my college graduation, literally giving me an evidence that she was affirming who I was. She saw who I was an artist from very early on, and she preserved it and kept it and nurtured that. So that's a story that I love to tell when earliest painting of mine.
That's great. Yes, right over here in the front row.
Oh, and
Second row.
There's a few over there. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Where was I born? When? I was born in 1960. That's a long time ago. But before the moon landing. My favorite painting. That's like picking your children, right? Which one's your favorite? But when my mom passed, because of all that, my brother, she passed in Saratoga, California, and my brother called me, and he is like Martha. He's literally the CEO of companies, and so within about 2 hours, he had everything arranged except for where to bury her. But he's not a Christian, but he did all this research on local churches, and I said, well, we can lay her in my church in Princeton. I wasn't thinking about this, but there's a plot that I could give her, and he sent me her casket, several to choose from, and I just had this thought that I wanted to paint it because she gave me this gift of art to me and preserved it and nurtured it. She deserves to be cremated in a casket that is beautiful. So I said to my brother, "Do you think I can paint it?" And he said, "Yeah, I think that might be possible." And of course, he had like 5 steps ahead of me, and he talked to the funeral director and in Los Gatos, and so I went up there, and I actually painted this in paper, which is what I do in Nihonga, which is perfectly suited for this kind of thing, where you can just bring it and put it on the casket, and the casket is perfectly, because it's not varnished, really, it's perfect for that. So, and my brother said, well, are you going to keep this painting? And I said, no, the whole purpose is that it burns, that it goes with her in less than 24 hours. And that's probably the most important painting that I ever did. And especially because it did not last, and that it was cremated with her, that it was ephemeral in that sense. But to me, the value of art is what is enduring. It's not necessarily, whether it gets shown in a museum. It's the deepest realm of communication, is to honor somebody, and to be able to do that with the gift that God has given me, that my mother helped me with, was the greatest gift, and so that's what I say. Is so it's a painting that I can't really show. I do have photos, but yeah.
That's beautiful. Great question. Let's go with the young woman, girl in the back there. This will be our last question.
Where was I?
How old were you?
How old was I? I was 2.5 initially, and then I came back to U.S. To go to middle school in New Jersey, and then for graduate school, I was 24, I'm going to say. Yeah, so both times I was there, yeah.
We actually do have time for one more right here.
Quick.
Yes.
Well, I would just like to say thank you for you on behalf of the school and everybody here. Thank you for the great gift you've given to us today.
Yes.
And in return, we would also like to give you a gift.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
So here we go.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Thanks.
So before I hand it over to Charlie, a final blessing to Mako and to each of you from the Proverbs and from Isaiah. From the Proverbs, God asks us to write kindness and truth on the tablet of our hearts. And from Isaiah, arise, shine, for your light has come. and the glory of the Lord has arisen upon you.
Thank you.
Before you guys get up here, this is a two-part gift. We wanted to be able to sing, partly because this is one of the things we love and cherish, and we want to just give to you both. And so thank you for blessing us with this. We also have a collection of the songs that are dear to us, cantabile songs, and we'd like to present to you this book,
Wow.
and to you as well. We're so grateful for you guys both being here, and just really appreciate your insights. I'd also love to be able to pray for you as we close out our time. All right, let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity we've had to hear truth and beauty proclaimed through conversation between Dr. Ferch and Dr. Fujimura. Lord, it is a true blessing to receive from your hand wisdom, truth, goodness. Father, what a delight to share it with one another. Lord, we pray that you would bless each one of these men in their work. Father, we pray that you would continue to establish the works of their hands, that you would give them ever-increasing skill to be able to do that mysterious thing, communicate. Father, and I pray that the source and substance of their communication would be the glory of your name for now and forevermore. Father, we pray that you would bless them this week in the exhibits and the opportunities to speak and share with others. We thank you for making this possible, and we praise your name. In your name, amen.
Amen.
Amen.